Okay, recording is started. Two economic factors. Homestead Act, yeah. So one thing that we missed was all of that, the new markets opening up, specifically in communication. We covered railroads, but we didn't cover the markets angle, which is fine. But think about new market. There's new opportunities to make money in those railroad businesses, you should say, and those communication businesses, right? Like building telegraph lines and all that stuff. Plus, like the farming is good and it's the opportunity for that. And then people making money off of those people and all that stuff. So good stuff, solid responses. Appreciate y'all participating. So we're going to go ahead and get into our topic. So the objective is the same from yesterday, right? We're talking about causes and effects of settlement in the West. But now we're going to get into the people, we're going to get into the society, and we're going to get into how the U.S. changed. There is a really, really, really good resource we're going to look at tomorrow that is going to be about the side of the United States that didn't necessarily think this was a good thing. Because, hey, believe it or not, even back then, not all of the U.S. agrees that everything's a good thing for the most part. So key point one, let's start with there, right? In hopes of achieving ideals, right? These awesome special ideas of self-sufficiency and independence, many, many, many migrants moved to both rural and boomtown areas in the West. And they did so for economic opportunity, right? Such as building railroads, mining, farming, and ranching. Cannot forget ranching. We're gonna have a whole slide about ranching in a second. So that is your first key point. Ranch, and I know some of you might be thinking, aren't those the same thing? Not really. Farming, ranching aren't the same thing. So make sure you just differentiate the two. For the big difference, farming, plants, ranching, animals, specifically cows, if we're talking about the United States in the 1860s and 80s. So ranching is cows, farming is food or plants. So two different things. We'll go about another minute and 20 seconds or so. If you need more time, then let me know. Again, the biggest part you got to get here is people are leaving for hopes of self-sufficiency and independence. It's not things they're going to get. At least not everybody is going to get. Right? We talked about it not being an easy life to live last time. And that is very much true. And rural means literally middle of nowhere, right? Sodbusters and such. And a boomtown, we talked about boomtowns yesterday, right? Do you remember boomtowns? Yes, no? Can I get some yeses or nos in chat if we remember boomtowns? If not, so I can explain it again. That's kind of important. Yep. No? Okay. So a boomtown is basically a city that is growing really, really fast and is really, really populated, like really quickly. So, for example, this is an old reference, but like Tombstone, Arizona was a boom town. It was a town in Arizona you've probably never heard of. And the reason you've never heard of it is because it was really popular for a really short period of time while there was silver in the town. But eventually silver mines dry up and people leave there anymore. California was one, but the difference is that California, a lot of those, not all of them, but some of those cities sustained their boom townness. Like San Francisco was a boom town, but it grew and it stayed popular in part because the railroads are starting and going through there. Tombstone's an example where there is no reason to be there because it's literally a silver mine and desert, right? So when the silver mine's gone, there's no reason to stay there. And that's what happened to most boom towns. The boom towns that kept that stuff were shorter. Like the boom towns that survived are few and far between. Most of them die. So that's what a boomtown is. Armadillo, New Austin. That might be true. I'm not sure. Because you'd probably know more about that background than me. But yeah. Actually, I think you're right. I think Tumbleweed was a boomtown, and that's why it's empty now in that game. I think that's the whole point of that, right? Because it's like a ghost town. Okay, so let's move forward. Free range cattle drive. So before you write everything word per word, I will give you time. Don't write everything word per word. You probably don't need it. I'm going to basically break down what's going on during this time, right? We talked about like the Wild West, this romanticized idea of like cowboys and guns and smoking hand-rolled cigarettes and getting cancer and all this crazy stuff, right? And what you have here is that between railroads crossing into places like Kansas City and vast amounts of cattle being brought over by migrants, which were brought over with varying degrees of success, there's huge roaming herds of cows wandering around. Huge roaming herds of cows in the Great Plains, right in the middle of nowhere in the Great Plains, just wandering around. Cows are really easy to hold on, Jay, don't write anything yet. Cows are really easy. It's really easy for cows to live in places like that. They're living among bison and stuff. And so what you get there is this idea of the cowboy comes out of this era. Any, like, whether it's a video game, whether it's a movie, TV show, maybe some of your parents are like, I like Western movies. Maybe some of your parents do. I don't know. Maybe some of you guys do. I don't know. But that concept, that idea comes from this time period. And what they are doing essentially is Clint Eastwood movies, all those old movies, it's during this time period. Almost all of them. There's very few that are outside of this time period, even though you wouldn't know it from watching the movies, right? That's like 20 years is generous. It's really closer to like 9, but 20 years total is when you can say it started to where it ends. Wow. And what's happening all at once is they're doing these free range cattle drives where these cowboys, they're like ranch hands, but they don't have a ranch. Their whole thing is to be free range, free graze. And they're marked these. So this is a portrait, a painting, but these are some actual pictures of these cattle herds. And they're walking them like literally across the United States, from like Kansas to Texas and back and forth. And they're taking them up and down the trails, I should say, the trails. So what you're writing for this slide, you need to know what free range cattle drives were. You need to know that. The bottom one is a picture. So these two, I believe, are pictures. Like, this is in Texas. I think you can find this picture at one of the Texas state museums. So this is a Texas one, and I think this is somewhere in the middle of the plains. This is a much later one, you can tell because of the hat and stuff. And I don't think he's wearing a gun. But anyways, yeah, these two are photos. This is a painting. But so what do you need to know on the slide? Sorry, I got distracted, guys. What a free range cattle drive is. You need to know what it is. So paraphrase that. You don't need to write these word per word, right? What is a free range cattle drive? What did it do, right? What was the point of them? Well, why is the point? Everybody's making money during the time. You need to know about the romanticized West, right? The idea that the cowboy, where does that come from? The Wild West, all that stuff. It's because of this. And you would also need to know, last thing you need to know, this ends in part because of homesteaders and barbed wire fences. And we'll get into all that on the next slide. So what ends this? Homesteaders, barbed wire fences. What are we going over? We're not going to go over Dutch Vanderland and his gang. Isaac, that's funny though. But in theory, those guys in that group, in that game, are practicing during this, the time period they're reminiscing about that they want to go back to is this time period, because I think those games are in the 1890s. Right? Because I know Red Dead's in like 1910, the first one, 1899. See, so they're reminiscing about this time when they were all young and reminiscing about like what they used to be able to do. It's during this time period. And it's, again, a much shorter time period than even this will say. This is because historically you can't say it's not happening if it's still happening. Yeah, it's like, so yeah, that's the time period they're reminiscing about, this time period, that's where it comes from. Again, most of those movies or TV shows you'll watch about the Old West, even if they don't know it, they're really in this time period. So about 2 minutes, because there's a lot of information on this slide, but it's a lot of important stuff. Again, you got to know about the free range cattle drives. The idea of the romanticized West, the cowboy that comes from this time period. And again, this will end due to homesteaders and that barbed wire fencing invention. For the record, the reason barbed wire is going to be such a big deal out west is because there's not a lot of trees and lumber around to build traditional fences. So the idea of you just put a stick and you wrap barbed wire around it and there's your fence is why it's so popular. About 30 seconds. If anybody needs more time, let me know. We are about to move on. All right. So moving forward. So next you have sod busters and land opportunities. So what is a sod buster? A sod buster were the first people to inhabit land, right? So some people went rural, some people went to boom towns. If you went rural, there's a very good chance you're going to be the first Anglo person, the first white or the first American to live there, right? And because of that, they gave the nickname sod buster, which is like ground buster, dirt buster, like you're digging into the dirt first. We talked about the Homestead Act yesterday. Just note, only 1/5 of people claimed new land plots through the Homestead Act. Most people bought land from railroad companies who had got the land free from the government or on really cheap. The land from most of these smaller farms will be consolidated into larger farming companies or by larger farming companies because the individual homesteaders will not be able to maintain the 160 acres. It's not enough to live off of or to pay for. They get into debt, so they have to sell their land. And so larger landowners will consolidate most of these small homesteads or farms, regardless of how they obtain them, whether it's free from the government or otherwise. So what do you need? You need sod busters. Point out the thing about only 1/5 claiming from the Homestead Act, and point out that land is being consolidated. Land is being consolidated by larger companies and farming groups. I think that's actually a good question. I'm going to kind of share it out loud. So, like, didn't the reason most people lived out there is because the land could literally kill them, right? Is that the reason that it was wild? For the most part, it's wild because people are moving faster than society can catch up to it. But the type of people that gravitate towards moving west are not the people who have everything perfect and going for them back east, right? There's very few of those people, and they're so few, I'm not even gonna like give them the light of day. The people that are going out west are either the people that can't function in normal society out east, or who have nothing, or who scrape together everything they have to get just enough to go do this, right? They're the people who need this opportunity, who want to take it. And in part, are there some people who are just out there like to be out there in the frontier? Yes, there's whole, what would you say, generations of people who make lives as like Indian fighters or mountain men or scouts or things like that that are out there doing that stuff. So those are the type of people that are out west, which is why you get that. It's almost like a whiplash, and that's what this whole Gilded Age is about. When society catches up to the end of the frontier and there's no more frontier, and you're like, whoa, and it corrects itself, makes the West not so wild anymore, and it's fast. It happens fast because there's a lot of money in the West. So it's not something people want to risk. About a minute and change on here because there's less information. Plot of Red Dead 2. It's the plot of both Red Deads in a lot of ways, except the first one's a little further along, right? But yeah, that is. I'm telling you, those games have really good, fun historical plots if you look into them. But yeah, it is pretty much plot of Red Dead 2. Right, but there's a whole underlying thing in the first one about how he's like the last cowboy almost. I'm not gonna get into it. It's a whole thing. We can talk about it after school or something later at some point. We'll break down Red Dead and how it's super historically awesome. Yeah, Australia had to fight emus. That's true, and that was in like the 1920s, I think. That was after they had machine guns in that one. They were trying to kill emus with machine guns in Australia. Yeah, Australia's definitely wild. Australia had really cool natives too. The Aboriginals there are awesome people. They had like 2 Lewis MGs. Yeah, I think it's 2, right? They had Lewis machine guns. Those things are, yeah. I think they only killed like 20 emus too, and they had giant machine guns. All right, guys. So we're gonna move forward. If you need more time on this, I'm gonna give you a few seconds to grab a screenshot. And we're gonna move on. Again, real photographs. Right from here on in, we're gonna get to see actual photographs. So keep that in mind. I'm gonna try to get as many as possible moving forward. They're built different. Oh, I can't get in. I wouldn't be able to tell you guys specifically why they killed emus. It was something about populations and complaining farmers, but yeah, I know that the oversimplified guy has a video about it that probably explains it better than I could because I've only seen it once, but it's good stuff. So, second key point: as migrant populations increased in number, and the American bison population was decimated by competition for land and resources in the West among white settlers. So that is a jumbled up mess. Migrant populations increase. American bison population decreases. And there is competition for land and resources in the West among white settlers. So those are the 3 factors for this key point. I don't know why it's worded like that. I don't know what I did. Probably editing and I accidentally deleted a couple of frames. So that's a horrible sentence. But those are the 3 points you need, right? Population increases, migrant population. American bison population is decimated, and competition for land and resources in the West increases among white settlers. We'll go about another minute, and then we're going to move on. About 40 seconds. Isaac, I don't get that reference. If you're talking about Wounded Knee, we're gonna get there. We're gonna talk about Wounded Knee. Sorry, Isaac, I'm missing that one. I have to fill me in on what that one is. All right, we're gonna move forward, and we're gonna get into some of the. We're gonna talk about bison herds first. So, prior to the massive migration west, bison herds were vast, filled the plains. This is a photo of modern day bison herds. This just pales, there was more, or at least there was at least as many as there are now. So, but this is more or less what a bison herd would look like back then, probably a little fuller. Do they taste good? They taste pretty good, actually. Bison meat's pretty good. Many Native American tribes, especially those Great Plains tribes and the hunting tribes, live off of the bison, right? And this isn't elementary school, so I'm just gonna tell you the truth, right? Like the whole concept of like, oh, they use the buffalo and it's like they respect it and like the buffaloes volunteer to get killed by them and stuff. That's not really true. But they live off of the bison. They follow bison herds. It's where they get most of their food from. It's where they get most of their pelts from. It's where they get most of their bones. Imagine believing that. I mean, as a kid, I did. Everybody does. But there are very, very, very good historians, and I'm forgetting one of them, their names right now, the guy that said it, that argue that Native Americans might have done this by themselves, given the time, if whites weren't busy killing them all, because technology was advancing so quickly that bison herds were becoming targets because of things like rifles, right? And there's buffalo rifles. During this time period, rifles whose selling points are, this is what you use to kill a buffalo. But it is the whites specifically and the American migrants who are decimating these herds. They're killed in massive numbers. Very few of them are killed for food. Most of them are killed for hides and for sport. So these are some buffalo hunters over piles of buffalo hides. These are piles of buffalo bones on some train. Wait, about what? I don't know what you mean. But yes, so most of them are killed for sport and for hides. Now, don't get me wrong, some people ate them, but that's what that's what the natives did. The natives killed them for food. But a lot of the whites are killing them for markets in the east that want things like hide and bone. The natives killed them for food. And some of these people did, but they were killing so many so quickly that it really wasn't for food. I didn't put the picture of the rotting carcasses because I thought that was a little too much, but you can look it up later if you want. They're much like these of the bones. There's pictures of just piles of rotten you guys can look it up. I didn't have room on the slide anyways. Of rotting buffalo carcasses, and it's just piles and piles of them, and they're just there and they're shooting them from trains and stuff, guys. Like, the bison herds were decimated, and it had horrible ramifications for native tribes more than anything else, because there was no more bison for them to live off of, and that's going to come into play in a little later. The only reason we have bison today, and I'm not kidding, and I know I'm going to sound like a fanboy, but it's true, is because of conservation efforts started in the very early 20th century by Roosevelt and Aldo Leopold, Teddy Roosevelt. And so those are the only reasons that you have some of that stuff around today, because they weren't going to be around. Like, there's more turkeys now than there were back then, right? And it's because of conservation. But again, that's stuff we can get into later. So what do you need to know? You need to know that people are killing buffalo herds or bison herds. Use bison, it sounds more professional. And they are mostly being killed for hides and sport, not food. And Native American society can never be the same afterwards. Their numbers are going to be reduced so severely that even if all of a sudden the United States was going to say, hey, Comanche, go back home. Hey, Lakota and Sioux, go back home. They couldn't do it even if they wanted to. In fact, a lot of the war bands that get out and fight with the government struggle to maintain their lifestyle because they can't feed their tribes and their country because they can't find buffalo anymore. So it's an inadvertent Indian deterrent on top of being a, financial opportunity. So about a minute and change. You saw it. Yeah, they're not easy. They're not hard to find. Like I actually, it was harder for me to find the one with the bones than it was to find the buffalo carcasses. They're easy to find. You can find like buffalo soldiers too, which we're not going to get into today. About 30 more seconds. If you need more time than this, grab an image, grab a picture. We're going to move on. Are you talking about the carcass? Yeah. Well, because they take the hides off. They want the hides, and a lot of them cut off. They would cut off the horns, or they would take the skulls, and it's just a big gross image. All right, so let's move forward. Yeah, it very much was a mess. Okay, so is that the last one? Yeah, last key point of the day. The U.S. government, hey, what a surprise, violated treaties with American Indians and responded to resistance with military force, eventually confining American Indians to reservations and denying tribal sovereignty. That last part's really important. They also denied tribal sovereignty. What a twist. You're not wrong. It's not quite a shocker. You guys know this stuff. We've been talking about it already. But we're going to get into some details. We're going to talk about the Indian Wars. I'm probably going to rant and rave about the Comanche, because why wouldn't I? And then we're going to talk about the Wounded Knee Massacre and some of the last couple of atrocities that the United States did. So about a minute and a half. And again, don't forget the tribal sovereignty part. That's a big portion of this. That's a big section. It's a big important reason. All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward. Make sure you have a screenshot of the key point if you did not finish it, because we're going to move on. I mean, that's fair. That's a way to. I wouldn't sugarcoat what the U.S. did to natives. It's not something I think I believe in. I'm not a fan of that. Okay, maybe fourth grade's a little too young. So let's talk about the reservation system, and then we're going to get into native resistance. So the reservation system, you guys already probably know about, right? Indian removal. Hey, we're going to give you big chunks of land. They look kind of like this. They were probably a little bigger before. And the Indians go live there. They're a sovereign nation, right? Which means they are the Lakota Nation, the Sioux Nation, the Cherokee Comanche Nation, right? Yeah, Trail of Tears, right? They were moved from Georgia to Oklahoma. And on the reservation system, I'm not trying to make it sound great, but compared to what ends up happening, it's pretty great. The tribes are sovereign. They're their own nations. And they get to live on this land the way they always have, right? Where people don't own land. You know, you're a tribe, you move around, you do your stuff. But the whole point of the reservation system is to make the natives assimilate and farm. They don't want to farm. They don't really like doing that stuff. Now, between dependence on the now decimated buffalo herds, right, which is important, and a general lack of desire to farm, most Indian tribes struggle in this system. And when I say struggle, I just mean they don't do well here. They want to go out and hunt. This lack of ability to hunt will lead to them going out and raiding. Do you write all of this? I'm getting to that. Give me a second. They go out and they raid, right? And the problem is natives aren't necessarily following the rules. Even if they were, it wouldn't have mattered. But they're not following the rules that the American government set for them. And more factors like discovering gold or just moving them again will make natives lose this land. And eventually you're going to get them moved again and again and again, right? Like Oklahoma isn't where all the natives are now. They keep getting moved. There are some wars in between. And after years of conflict and betrayal, I should say, the sovereignty of the nations was undone with something called the Indian Appropriations Act of 1871. This act also nullified all former treaties with the natives because it claimed and stated and made law that Indians were not sovereign tribes. They were wards of the United States. So because of that, all those old treaties about like, this is your land, it's guaranteed, out the window. And the final nail in the coffin is something called the Dawes Act, which took native tribes' reservation land and split it up into 160-acre plots that was going to be farmed by the Indians. Now, they gave a lot of it to the Indians, but this ends the reservation system. The assimilation movement will take hold after that, which is an attempt to straight up end Indian culture for citizenship. You want to be a citizen of the United States, stop doing everything you've been doing for a millennia. Stuff like that. It's not great. What do you need to write on the slide? You need to know what the reservation system was. Include the thing about sovereignty. It's important. You need to know that Indians didn't like that system, I guess. Put it in your own words, but right, Indians don't function well. It's not designed for them. It's not fair. It's not good. Nothing about this is good or right. But due to outside factors like discovery of gold on their lands or just being resettled, natives are going to like have conflict with this. It's going to lead to conflict, this system. And eventually you get something called the Indian Appropriations Act, which ends their sovereignty and nullifies all the old treaties. And then the final nail is a Dawes Act. So reservation system, Indian Appropriations Act, Dawes Act. Those are the three things you need from this slide. I'll give you about 2.5 minutes for that. Those are the three definitions you need. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. About 2 minutes on the clock. Got about 3 more slides after this. But you will not need as much info on the next couple of slides. Yeah, there's very little info on the next couple. Like, there's a lot of words on the slide, but don't get it word for word. You're not going to need it. About 1.5 minutes left. If you're going to need more time than that, please grab a screenshot so we can move on. In 1 minute. Again, if you need more time, please grab a screenshot. Sorry. Sorry, I don't do good with waiting around. All right, we're about to move on. 10 seconds. So one thing to point out on the next slide, I'm going to show you some maps. It's these maps, but bigger. This is what indigenous territory would have looked like probably right around the Civil War / end of the Civil War. So a lot of vast open spaces that are very well connected, right? Big nation holdings. And this is what they look like, not quite today, but would be during the 1880s and 90s. So a big change, big, bad, horrible change. So Indian resistance, let's get into this. What do you need to know here? Several Indian groups are going to fight for a long time, and it's mostly guerrilla style fighting, right? Hit and runs using the horses. Certain tribes are better at that than others. We'll get into that in a second. And they will fight for a long time, but again, it's something I can't stress enough. They're going to call these things wars. Like, they're going to call them the Indian Wars. They're going to be known as the Sioux Wars, which you're going to need to write down. Sioux Wars, fought by the Sioux and the Lakota and all these Great Plains tribes. But they're not wars in the traditional sense, because the United States has an army, but the natives don't actually have an army. They have small bands of fighters that are fighting. Couple of hundred. I think the biggest group they get ever, and it's only one time and it only lasts a couple of weeks, is something like 2,000 maybe, and that's pushing. Some people will say it's a lot lower, and that was the group that killed Custer at Custer's last stand, the Little Bighorn and stuff. But basically, and Custer, by the way, was this American colonel that you may or may not have heard of, that was like, I can fight Indians, whatever. So he takes 200 guys and he fights around 2,000 Indians, and they kill him and all his soldiers. So that happened. But these aren't wars in the traditional sense, because there's so few natives fighting. Like, there's only ever a couple of hundred at any given time, and that is not bode well for their chances, right? And they're not going to win. After the Indian Appropriation Act, there will be more wars with the Sioux and the Comanches also, but constant struggles, loss of the buffalo herds, Indians are forced to give in over time. So basically, what do you need here? You need to know that resistance is happening. It's been happening this whole time. Sioux Wars, just pointed out, one of the examples of resistance. After the Indian Appropriation Act, the Sioux and the Comanche will go to war again, but due to things like the loss of the buffalo herds, no worries, Isaac, you're good. They're not able to keep up with that. So that's all you need for the slide. I'm going to give you about a minute and a half for that. And I'm going to ramble about the Comanches because I love the Comanche. I know you guys learned about these people in world history, the Mongols. The Comanches are like Mongols, but if Mongols had rifles. They mastered the horse like no other native tribe ever will. In fact, if you ever see a movie or a TV show and you see an Indian on a horse, like fighting off of the horse, it probably either is a Comanche or it wasn't real. All these other tribes that tried to fight like Comanche couldn't. When the Comanche were the Comanche ruled Texas all the way up until it became Texas. Like whilst the Spanish and the Mexicans owned it, part of why the Mexicans were like, hey, you want to just live in Texas, white people, is because it's full of Comanches. And in fact, the only reason that whites are able to defeat Comanches in battle is because of a guy named Samuel Colt. Does anyone know who Samuel Colt is or what Samuel Colt did and invented that helped turn the tide for the whites? But what type of gun? He made a specific gun. I'll say it. He made revolvers, right? He made a gun that shot more than one bullet at once. He made a revolver. He made a revolving pistol. And the first one isn't even that good, right? In fact, the Texas Ranger captain that used them against Comanches for the first time found them in like a box in the Republic of Texas, like trash bin. I'm not even kidding. And he reallocated them for Indian fighting. And it's the repeater and the repeating revolver specifically and the Texas Rangers who are the only people to first have success against Comanches. And eventually everybody that's going to beat Comanches, they copy that style. But again, they're like Mongols with rifles and with Native American combat. They shoot arrows like 20 at a time. They're riding horses since they're little kids. The chiefs used to be like, they used to keep track of how awesome the chiefs were by how many horses they had. Big Iron on the Hip, that's a good song. But yes, but Winchester Wednesday. That's the only reason, guys. I'm not kidding. The Comanche were ruthless. And back when it's muskets and stuff, like the Spanish, like they were afraid of Comanches. That's what they built all those missions and forts for, was to hide from Comanches. Winchester repeaters later. That's like in this time. That's in like the 1880s and I believe 1880s, 70s. But all those repeaters came a little later. This is in the 1830s, that first Colt revolver, the 1830s and 40s. But it's what turns the tide is technology catching up. But again, the Comanche, man, they're awesome. But again, there's so few of them by this time. Like this is Quanah Parker, who's one of the most revered, very well-known Comanche chiefs, like in Texas specifically. You might have learned about him in 7th grade, like way back when. But yeah, real OG right here, Quanah Parker. Okay, so let's move on. Let's move on from resistance. And let's talk about the ghost dance movement. So after these wars are over and some time has passed, a movement started by a guy named Wovoka, who you might want to get his name down. He was a spiritual leader, led something called the ghost dance movement. And it's pretty peaceful. I can't speak on it with absolute authority, so I'm not going to. But to my understanding, the ghost dance movement it's a spiritual thing. It's a dance. And the whole point of it was, let's bring back our ancestors from the past, right? It's a native ritual. And they're bringing back their ancestors in hopes that the ancestors will help them remove whites from their land. And this guy, Wovoka, who's a spiritual leader, says, hey, do this dance. It'll bring your ancestors' spirits back. They will help us remove the whites from the area. This is the movement. You just need to know what the movement was and name the leader, right? I hesitate to say nonviolent, but just say it's a peaceful style of dance. This isn't fighting, right? This isn't raiding. This is doing a dance and doing a ceremony. This movement will be one of the reasons why you get the Wounded Knee Massacre, which we're going to talk about next. So I'll give you a quick minute. This is not a lot of info. No, I would not want to forget. Yeah, never forget Wounded Knee is good. Designed in 1860. So I wasn't too far off. Yes, 66. Winchester's repeater. I don't think they're the first repeater, though. I think they're because I think Winchester had like the wood handle on it and stuff. They had a dance off. It's not a dance off. It's more of like a ceremony. Think of like communion, if you all are Catholic, right? It's like it's a ceremony. It's not a literal dance off. It's like a ceremony. About 20 seconds. So if you need more time than that, grab a screenshot. But again, all you need to know is what the ghost dance movement was. You need to know the name of Avoca, Wovoka. Again, I'm saying his name super wrong. And then you need to know that this is part of why Wounded Knee Massacre will happen. DP Groovin. All right, so now we're going to get into the Wounded Knee Massacre. Oh boy, the Wounded Knee Massacre. Okay, so in 1890, the U.S. Army 7th Cavalry surrounded a group of ghost dancers. Spotted Elk was the chief. Spotted Elk, or they also referred to him as Bigfoot, was on the troublemaker list. So the Army had a troublemaker list of chiefs. Quanah Parker from the slide before was on it, of chiefs that they were like, oh, these guys don't follow the rules. These chiefs break the rules. They like to go out and hunt. They like to carry weapons. So Spotted Elk's already on that troublemaker list. The 7th Cavalry surrounds his tribe, they're doing a ghost dance, but the 7th Cavalry demand that they surrender their weapons, but under the rules, they were allowed to have their weapons, so they didn't want to give them up. During this exchange, which is just supposedly a verbal exchange, a shot goes off. We don't know who, we don't know which side. Kind of like the Boston Massacre, right? We don't really know who fired the shot. But I can tell you what happened next, and that's that the 7th Cavalry killed anywhere between 150 to 200 Indians. Some historians will say that it's twice that amount. This included men, women, and children. This was not just when I say there were armed ghost dancers, it might have been like 30 soldiers, 30 fighters that were armed, and the rest were families when I say that. So keep that in mind. Most of these 150 to 200 is going to be families, not fighting men, right? Able-bodied fighters. 25 soldiers will be killed in the battle because even though there's so few Indians, and even though they were kind of caught off guard, right? Indians don't die easy. They're very hard fighters. If you're ever reading a book and it tries to make the claim that like native tribes are victims, it is wrong. So be careful with the book you're reading because they were victimized, but that doesn't make them victims, right? So they killed 25 soldiers, and some historians place the deaths again of the natives to twice that, 300, 400, something like that. But we won't know how many. Bottom photograph, real photograph. Wounded Knee is not a battle. You might see it referred to as a battle. It is a massacre. It's not a real battle. Don't let them call it a battle. Some propaganda nonsense. It's not a battle. Again, men, women, and children are killed. This is the Lakota tribe, by the way. It's natives that belong to the Lakota tribe. And I know I swap between Indian and Native a lot. That's a preference thing. So the more accurate you're being, they are Indians. Like the Comanche like to be called Indians. They don't like being called natives, at least back then. So I do it. I swap between them because I just prefer to say native. So just know that. Keep that in mind. I don't know if I mentioned that before. But and a lot of the primary sources will say Indian. So that's why it swaps. In case I was confusing, like, why is he swapping? It's not a PC thing. It's a primary source thing. And a lot of the tribes are like, we like Indian. So Comanche specifically. So again, I'll give you about a minute and a half. You need to know about the Wounded Knee Massacre. Basically summarize what happened. I wouldn't leave out the name 7th Cavalry. Make sure that you know who did it. I wouldn't leave out Spotted Elk's name either because Spotted Elk's the chief. He's on the troublemaker list. Like I said, guys, I wish we had more time to get into stuff like this because those troublemaker lists and a lot of the stuff that these native fighters did is really good. Let me know if y'all are like, bored or something and want a book to read. I know of a really good book about Comanches that I finished a couple months ago. Really good. But yeah, so about a minute and change, then we'll move on. The reason I wouldn't consider it a battle is because it's not so much that the numbers were so lopsided as much as it was that it's not two armies meeting. It's not two fighting forces meeting. It's a bunch of soldiers showing up and surrounding a tribe while they're doing something, and then fighting starts, right? And the 26 soldiers that died, it's almost like self-defense. Does that make sense? Like, I'm saying this not directly because this is me talking, not AP, like, this isn't your AP test. This is me I'm starting to get into opinion territory here, which is scary for me. But does that make sense a little bit? Like, the reason I say it's a massacre, which I wouldn't refer to it as a battle, is because it's not two fighting forces meeting. A fight happened, but it's not two armies meeting. Yeah, like Sand Creek's the same way, where like the Braves are out looking for whites, right? And then the army guys there show up and they kill the tribe. They kill the women and the children. It's the same thing, right? That's not a battle either. That's a massacre, Sand Creek Massacre. And Sand Creek, I think that colonel even was like trying to say that he killed a bunch of he killed the chief and all this stuff. And then the chief showed up a few months later and it was crazy. And they were like, hey, dude, what'd you do? And he's like, oh, I didn't, Yeah, Sand Creek's another massacre. I think that's the worst one on record. But so that would I would say that would be the chief difference, is that in a battle it's two armies meeting. In stuff like this, like Wounded Knee, Sand Creek massacres, one army shows up and the other side isn't there to fight, at least not initially. All right, guys, so it is 3:17. So here's what I'm going to do. We got about 8 minutes left. I'm going to show you to your exit ticket. It's a really easy exit ticket. You thought yesterday was easy. This is going to be even easier. So quick Google form on Google Classroom. It's already in there. All you got to do is click into it, put your name. If you don't put your name, you're not getting credit, because I forgot to do this last time. So if you put your name, you don't put your name, you're not getting credit. These are multiple choice questions. These should be fairly easy. You should be able to answer these. But you got to justify your answer with proof. So if you're going to tell me the answer to this is C, prove it. 2 sentences, no more than that. If you can do it in one, you'll get full credit as long as you can give me proof. Justify your response. 1 to 2 sentences for each. This shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes, because it'll take you like 30 seconds to answer the questions. They're that easy. At least I think they are. So if you have any questions, let me know. It is already posted. Make sure you put your name. If you do not put your name, you will not get credit. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. What is your question, Isaac? But that is it for me, guys. So if you have questions, I'm going to be here for the next couple of minutes. We've got about 7 minutes left in class. Use the time. Finish your exit ticket. Don't be submitting them late. Why is RDR a historical masterpiece? I'm a little biased. Like, for example, other history teachers might have a different opinion than me. But for me, what makes it a historical masterpiece is it plays in a time period that I actually really, really enjoy, which is that post-Wild West era, right? And what they do really well is they wrote characters that feel like a lot of old movie characters, but blends of them or variants of them. And they showed you what those characters might be going through in 1890, right? Or in 1910, like when the second game takes place. And they do a really good job of that. My favorite movie, you can IMDb it later, is called Unforgiven. And it's a movie that does this. Like, not Set the Grave Robber. I'm thinking more too. When I say this, I'm talking more about the second. Like, the second one is a better, it personifies that stuff better. The first one is, it's in the background, the historical stuff. It's there, but it's in like Landon Ricketts in the first one is the guy I think of when you think of like old gunfighters. Like, that's an old gunfighter that's like living in Mexico. He's the one that got away, right? He's the one that got to die with his boots off. Which, if you ever, if you know anything about old gunfighters, like, that's the thing. It's like they all expect to not die in bed old, right? They all died young, except for a couple. So, but that's why there's little things in there like that in that first game, and then that second one's just everything. It's the whole game. The whole crux of the game is you're watching a bad guy not want to be a bad guy anymore. And historically speaking, it's taking place in the perfect backdrop. So yeah, those of you that are still here, that was me sort of talking about why Red Dead's a masterpiece. Those are good games. But again, I'm a kind of a sucker for Westerns. So 2 days before the raid on Beaches Up. That's cool. I didn't know that I knew that I figured he would die like that, but that's cool. I didn't know that that's actually in the canon that he dies in his sleep. See, I'm bad at doing side quests and stuff. That's probably why. It's probably my problem. Can read in the newspaper. Oh, okay. Yeah. So see, I don't do stuff like that. I probably should. I'd probably get more out of the games I play, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So a lot of it is just a little bit of my bias. Yeah, but that's cool stuff though. It really is. A lot of it's my bias in that I think it's just a great era, but they do it really well. There's not a lot of, thematically speaking, there's not a lot of inaccuracies as far as like what an old bank robber would be feeling in 1890 being chased by the government. That's cool. Yeah, lore's good stuff. But all right, guys, we got about 3 minutes left. So if there is nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and end this call so we can get the, that's what I'm looking for, the video uploaded. Wow, lost my train of thought there. So we can upload the video. So if you need anything else, reach out to me on Teams. Make sure you submit the exit ticket, guys. It's super easy. I should see a bunch of hundreds on those multiple choice questions. I only want to, and then if you justify it, I won't have to take out points. So let me know if you have any help, if you need any help. I'll see you guys. Have a great rest of your day. I won't be here tomorrow. The lesson's going to be recorded. It's going to be on Google Classroom. It'll look a little different. So it's not going to be new content. We'll talk about it later. Then Abraham Lincoln becomes worst tagged. Abraham Reyes. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, is that in that game too? I didn't know that. See, I'm learning all sorts of new stuff. We got to have a, I don't know, Red Dead conversation one of these days. Good to know. See you, Roman. All right, guys. Have a good one.